The bells of the Ursuline convent fell silent at precisely 3:17 a.m. on October 13, 1872. Sister Marie Claire had been keeping vigil in the chapel when the bronze tongues that had called faithful to prayer for over a century simply stopped mid-chime. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was hungry, swallowing even the whispered prayers that had echoed through these hallowed halls since 1727. In the flickering candlelight, shadows seemed to move independently of their sources, and the air grew thick with something that tasted of copper pennies and forgotten sins. What happened next would transform the oldest continuously operating convent in the United States into something far more sinister than a house of worship. By dawn, 7 nuns had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only their habits arranged in perfect circles on the chapel floor, as if the women had simply evaporated from within their sacred garments. The remaining sisters spoke in terrified whispers of voices calling from empty rooms, of footsteps echoing through corridors where no one walked, and of a presence so malevolent that even their most fervent prayers seemed to wither before reaching heaven. But the true horror wasn't what the church recorded in its official reports, sanitized accounts of unexplained departures and spiritual callings. The real terror lay in what they buried, literally and figuratively, in the convent's ancient crypts. Tonight, we're descending into the shadowed heart of the French Quarter, where Spanish moss hangs like funeral shrouds and the very stones seem to whisper secrets that were never meant for mortal ears. This is the story they prayed you'd never hear, the haunting mystery of the Ursuline nuns, where faith collided with something far older and infinitely more dangerous than any doctrine could contain. Before we unlock these consecrated doors, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss our journeys into history's most forbidden corners. Now, let us enter these hallowed halls, where prayer and terror dance together in the Louisiana darkness. The Ursuline convent stood like a fortress of faith against the chaos of 18th-century New Orleans. Built of cypress wood and brick between the river and the swamp, it housed the first nuns to arrive in what would become Louisiana territory. These weren't delicate flowers seeking shelter from the world, they were warriors of God, sent to civilize a frontier town that reeked of sin, slavery, and Spanish moss. They educated the daughters of planters and pirates alike, tended the sick during yellow fever epidemics, and maintained their sacred routines even when cannons thundered during the Battle of New Orleans. By 1872, the convent had weathered storms both literal and metaphorical. The Civil War had ended 7 years earlier, leaving New Orleans a conquered city struggling to rebuild its identity. Reconstruction brought federal troops, carpetbaggers, and a social upheaval that challenged every institution the Old South had held sacred. Yet through it all, the Ursuline sisters had remained constant, their prayers rising like incense, their charity flowing like the Mississippi, their presence a beacon of stability in an uncertain world. Mother Superior Marguerite de Saint Augustine ruled the convent with an iron will wrapped in velvet devotion. At 63, she had survived everything Louisiana could unleash, hurricanes that turned the Mississippi backwards, epidemics that filled graveyards faster than they could be dug, and wars that redrew maps with blood. Her faith was absolute, her discipline legendary, and her knowledge of the convent's secrets deeper than the crypts beneath the chapel floor. Those crypts held more than the remains of deceased sisters. Beneath the main altar, in chambers that predated the current building, lay artifacts that the church had deemed too dangerous for public knowledge. Spanish conquistadors had brought them from the New World's darkest corners, obsidian mirrors that reflected things that weren't there, golden idols whose eyes seemed to follow movement, and texts written in languages that hurt to pronounce. The Ursuline sisters had become their unwilling guardians, tasked with keeping these relics sealed away from a world that wasn't ready for their terrible truths. Sister Marie Claire, the youngest member of the community at 24, had been assigned to the night vigils only recently. Born Marie Claire Boudreau in the Bayou country west of New Orleans, she had entered the convent seeking escape from visions that had plagued her since childhood, glimpses of things that existed in the spaces between prayers, shadows that moved when no light cast them, voices that whispered in languages older than Latin. The sisters had welcomed her, believing that consecrated walls would shield her from whatever darkness pursued her. They were wrong. The first signs of trouble appeared in early October 1872, when Sister Marie Claire began reporting disturbances during her midnight prayers. Footsteps echoed from the sealed sections of the convent, areas that had been closed off decades earlier after a series of incidents that the church records described only as regrettable necessities. Doors that had been locked and blessed repeatedly were found standing open, revealing corridors that seemed to stretch further than the building's actual dimensions would allow. Mother Superior Marguerite initially dismissed these reports as the imaginative fears of a young woman adjusting to cloistered life. But when other sisters began experiencing similar phenomena, cold spots that defied the Louisiana heat, whispers in empty rooms, and the persistent smell of something rotting beneath the chapel floor, she was forced to confront the possibility that the convent's ancient guardianship was failing. The church archives, sealed in Rome for over a century, reveal the true nature of what the Ursuline sisters had been protecting. In 1729, Spanish authorities had transferred a collection of pre-Columbian artifacts to the convent after a series of deaths among the soldiers guarding them. These weren't mere archaeological curiosities, they were religious objects from civilizations that had worshipped things the Catholic Church couldn't name without blasphemy. The most dangerous of these artifacts was a mirror made from volcanic glass, polished to impossible smoothness by hands that had been dust for centuries before Christ walked the earth. According to the Spanish records, anyone who gazed into its surface for more than a few seconds would begin speaking in tongues, not the holy glossolalia of Christian mystics, but something far older and infinitely more threatening. The mirror showed not reflections but revelations, glimpses of a reality where humanity was neither dominant nor welcome. For nearly 150 years, the Ursuline sisters had maintained a careful vigil over these cursed relics. Specific prayers were recited at precise intervals, blessed candles burned continuously in the sealed chambers, and no sister was ever allowed to enter the crypts alone. The routine had become so ingrained in convent life that newer members often didn't understand the true purpose of their seemingly arbitrary duties, they simply followed traditions that kept ancient evils contained. But traditions, like chains, are only as strong as their weakest link. Sister Marie Claire's psychic sensitivity, the very gift that had driven her to seek sanctuary within consecrated walls, made her uniquely vulnerable to the artifact's influence. During her solitary vigils, she began to hear them calling, not with voices, but with something deeper than sound, a resonance that bypassed her ears and spoke directly to the part of her soul that had always been open to otherworldly influences. The obsidian mirror was the worst. Even sealed behind blessed stones and wrapped in consecrated cloth, it somehow projected its terrible visions into her dreams. She saw cities that had never existed on any earthly map, populated by beings that wore human shapes like ill-fitting clothes. She witnessed rituals that made her wake screaming, though she could never remember exactly what she had seen, only that it involved sacrifices that went far beyond mere death. By October 10th, Sister Marie Claire was no longer sleeping. Dark circles ringed her eyes like bruises, and her hands shook constantly as if she were perpetually cold. During communal prayers, the other sisters noticed that she sometimes mouthed words that weren't part of the liturgy, syllables that seemed to twist in the air and leave a taste of metal on listeners' tongues. Mother Superior Marguerite recognized the signs. She had seen them before, decades earlier, when another young sister had fallen under the artifact's influence. That incident had ended with an exorcism that left the possessed nun catatonic and the chapel floor permanently stained with something that wasn't quite blood. The church had quietly transferred the affected sister to a sanitarium in France, where she spent her remaining years drawing pictures of impossible geometries and whispering prayers in languages that predated human civilization. Determined to prevent a repeat of that tragedy, Mother Superior decided to perform a cleansing ritual that would reinforce the seals containing the artifacts. The ceremony required 7 sisters to maintain a prayer circle while she descended into the crypts to renew the blessed barriers. It was dangerous work, the kind that had claimed lives in previous generations, but she believed their faith would protect them. She was wrong about that too. The ritual began at midnight on October 12th, with 6 sisters joining Mother Superior in the chapel while Sister Marie Claire maintained her usual vigil. The chosen nuns, all veteran members of the community with decades of experience in spiritual warfare, arranged themselves in a perfect circle around the altar, their voices rising in harmonized Latin that had protected the convent for generations. But as Mother Superior descended into the crypts, carrying blessed candles and holy water, something went terribly wrong. The temperature in the chapel plummeted despite the October heat, and the candle flames began to flicker in patterns that hurt to watch. Sister Marie Claire, already weakened by days without sleep, felt something vast and hungry stirring in the darkness beneath their feet. The obsidian mirror, disturbed by the ritual's energy, began to resonate with a frequency that bypassed human hearing and struck directly at the soul. One by one, the praying sisters fell silent as visions flooded their minds, not the peaceful revelations of Christian mysticism, but glimpses of a reality where their God was either absent or powerless against older, hungrier deities. Sister Bernadette, a 40-year veteran of convent life, was the first to break. She began laughing, not with joy, but with the terrible mirth of someone who had seen the cosmic joke at the heart of existence. Her laughter infected the others, spreading like a plague of madness through the prayer circle until all 6 sisters were cackling in harmonized hysteria that echoed through the chapel like the sound of breaking glass. In the crypts below, Mother Superior heard the laughter and knew she had failed. The seals were breaking, not from external force but from internal corruption. The artifacts weren't just contained relics, they were seeds, planted in consecrated ground and watered with decades of faithful prayers, growing stronger with each passing year until they were ready to bloom into something that would remake reality in their own terrible image. The obsidian mirror cracked that night, not from physical stress but from the sheer weight of the visions it was projecting. As it split, the boundary between reflection and reality shattered with it. The chapel filled with shadows that moved independently of any light source, and the air itself seemed to thicken into something that could be touched, tasted, and breathed like liquid darkness. Sister Marie Claire, her psychic defenses already compromised, became a conduit for whatever was emerging from the broken mirror. Her body convulsed as alien thoughts flooded her mind, and when she opened her mouth to scream, the sound that emerged wasn't human. It was the voice of something that had been waiting in the spaces between seconds for centuries, finally given flesh and breath and the power to speak. The other sisters stopped laughing. They stopped breathing. One by one, they simply ceased to exist in any meaningful way, their bodies remaining but their souls drawn into the obsidian mirror's fractured surface like moths to a flame that burned with anti-light. Their habits collapsed to the floor in perfect circles, as if the women wearing them had simply evaporated, leaving behind only the memory of their presence and the echo of their final prayers. Mother Superior, trapped in the crypts as the seals she had tried to strengthen crumbled around her, made a choice that would haunt the church for generations. Rather than flee and allow whatever was emerging to escape into the world, she shattered the remaining artifacts with her own hands, accepting the spiritual contamination that would destroy her soul in order to prevent a greater catastrophe. The explosion of psychic energy that followed could be felt throughout the French Quarter. Windows cracked in buildings 3 blocks away, and every dog in the district began howling simultaneously. The Mississippi River itself seemed to recoil, its waters flowing backwards for nearly an hour as if trying to escape something too terrible to approach. When dawn broke on October 13, 1872, the surviving sisters found the chapel empty except for 7 perfectly arranged habits and a silence so complete it seemed to have weight. Mother Superior was discovered in the crypts, her hair turned white and her eyes reflecting a knowledge that no human mind should possess. She lived for 3 more days, speaking only to whisper warnings about mirrors and shadows and things that wore human shapes but dreamed in human dreams. The church's response was swift and absolute. The convent was sealed, its surviving members transferred to other institutions, and the official records sanitized to remove any mention of supernatural events. The building itself was blessed by 3 different bishops, exorcised by a team of Jesuit specialists, and finally abandoned to whatever spirits might choose to inhabit its empty halls. But abandonment didn't mean isolation. Over the decades that followed, the sealed convent became a magnet for those sensitive to supernatural influences. Psychics reported overwhelming sensations of dread when passing the building, and several attempted seances in the vicinity ended with participants speaking in unknown languages or drawing symbols that seemed to move when viewed directly. Local folklore developed around the site, with residents claiming to see lights moving through the empty windows on certain nights, always October 13th, always at 3:17 a.m., always accompanied by the sound of bells that no longer existed. Children dared each other to approach the building after dark, though few were brave enough to actually touch the walls that seemed to radiate cold regardless of the weather. The most persistent legend involved the obsidian mirror, which supposedly survived the destruction of the other artifacts. According to whispered stories passed down through generations of French Quarter residents, the mirror had been moved to a secret location within the convent, where it continued to show visions to anyone foolish enough to seek it out. These visions, the stories claimed, revealed not the future but the true nature of reality, a truth so terrible that most viewers either went insane or simply disappeared, drawn into the mirror's surface to join the 7 sisters who had vanished that October night. Modern paranormal investigators have attempted to explore the abandoned sections of the convent, though their efforts have been hampered by the church's continued ownership of the property and the building's reputation for driving away even the most experienced ghost hunters. Those who have managed brief visits report equipment malfunctions, unexplained temperature drops, and the persistent sensation of being watched by invisible eyes. Dr. Margaret Rousseau, a parapsychologist from Tulane University, conducted the most extensive investigation in 1972, exactly 100 years after the original incident. Her team documented numerous anomalies, including electromagnetic fluctuations that followed no known patterns, audio recordings that captured whispers in what linguists identified as pre-Columbian languages, and photographs that showed shadows in impossible configurations. Most disturbing were the mirror fragments Dr. Rousseau discovered in the sealed crypts. Each piece, no larger than a coin, reflected not the viewer's face but something else entirely, glimpses of places that existed in the spaces between reality, populated by entities that regarded human consciousness as a form of trespass. Several team members reported experiencing vivid nightmares after viewing the fragments, dreams that continued for months and seemed to carry information about civilizations that had never existed on Earth. The investigation ended abruptly when Dr. Rousseau herself began exhibiting symptoms similar to those described in the 1872 church records. She started speaking in tongues during interviews, drawing geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, and claiming that the mirror fragments were windows into the true cathedral, where prayers are screams and screams are prayers. The university quietly terminated the project and sealed Dr. Rousseau's research in archives that remain classified to this day. The Catholic Church's official position on the Ursuline convent incident has remained consistent for over 150 years. The building was abandoned due to structural concerns, the missing sisters transferred to other institutions, and any reports of supernatural activity are the product of overactive imaginations influenced by local folklore. Church historians point out that records from the period are incomplete due to various disasters, making it impossible to verify the more sensational claims surrounding the convent's closure. Yet internal church documents, obtained through Freedom of Information requests and leaked by sympathetic clergy, tell a different story. References to the New Orleans incident appear in Vatican correspondence well into the 20th century, always in the context of protocols for containing spiritually hazardous materials and training programs for priests assigned to special collections duties. These documents reveal that the Ursuline convent was not an isolated case but part of a global network of religious institutions tasked with guarding artifacts and knowledge that the Church deemed too dangerous for public awareness. Similar incidents occurred at monasteries in Tibet, convents in Ireland, and missions in South America, all involving religious communities that vanished under mysterious circumstances while protecting relics that predated Christian civilization. The pattern suggests a hidden history of the Catholic Church as humanity's last line of defense against supernatural threats that governments and academic institutions are unprepared to handle. The Ursuline sisters weren't just nuns, they were soldiers in a spiritual war that has been raging since the dawn of human consciousness, fighting enemies that exist in the spaces between prayers and the shadows cast by candlelight. Modern New Orleans has largely forgotten the true story of the Ursuline convent, though echoes of the incident continue to influence the city's unique relationship with the supernatural. Tour guides lead visitors past the building, sharing sanitized ghost stories that hint at deeper truths without revealing the full horror of what transpired within those walls. The building itself has been partially restored and now houses a museum, though certain sections remain sealed and off-limits to the public. Visitors to the museum often report unusual experiences: cameras that malfunction in specific rooms, sudden temperature drops that leave frost on windows despite the Louisiana heat, and the persistent sensation of being watched by invisible presences. Staff members have learned to avoid certain areas during night shifts, and security guards report that their equipment consistently fails when monitoring the sealed sections of the building. The most common supernatural encounter involves the sound of bells ringing at 3:17 a.m., despite the fact that the convent's original bells were removed decades ago. These phantom chimes are always accompanied by the faint echo of women's voices raised in prayer, though the words they sing belong to no known liturgy. Sensitive individuals report that the voices seem to be calling for help, as if the 7 missing sisters are still trapped somewhere between the world of the living and whatever realm claimed them that October night. Local psychics and spiritual practitioners maintain that the Ursuline convent remains one of the most spiritually active locations in New Orleans, a city already renowned for its supernatural atmosphere. They claim that the building serves as a kind of dimensional weak point, where the barriers between realities are thin enough for things to slip through from places that exist outside normal space and time. Some believe that the missing sisters are still alive in some form, trapped within the obsidian mirror's fractured surface and occasionally able to project their consciousness back into our reality. These manifestations, according to local folklore, take the form of shadowy figures glimpsed in peripheral vision, cold spots that move through rooms like invisible presences, and whispered warnings that echo through empty corridors. The mirror itself, if it still exists, has become the subject of intense speculation among those who study the paranormal. Some researchers believe it was destroyed along with the other artifacts, while others maintain that something so spiritually significant could never be completely eliminated, only hidden, waiting for someone with the knowledge and courage to seek it out. Urban explorers and paranormal enthusiasts continue to attempt unauthorized investigations of the sealed sections, though these efforts are consistently thwarted by security measures that seem to go beyond mere human vigilance. Trespassers report becoming lost in corridors that should lead to familiar areas, experiencing disorientation that lasts for hours, and encountering presences that communicate through emotions rather than words. The few individuals who claim to have reached the sealed crypts describe finding chambers that extend far deeper than the building's foundation should allow, filled with shadows that move independently of any light source and air that tastes of copper and forgotten prayers. Most retreat before exploring further, driven away by an overwhelming sense of wrongness that seems to emanate from the very stones themselves. As we stand at the threshold of this century-old mystery, we're confronted with questions that challenge our understanding of reality itself. Were the Ursuline sisters martyrs who sacrificed themselves to protect the world from supernatural threats? Are they still trapped somewhere beyond the veil, calling for rescue from faithful souls brave enough to hear their pleas? Or did they become something else entirely, transformed by their contact with forces that exist outside the boundaries of human comprehension? Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that the incident at the Ursuline convent was not an ending but a beginning, the first crack in a dam that has been holding back a flood of supernatural chaos for centuries. If the Church has been secretly guarding similar artifacts around the world, how many other seals are weakening? How many other religious communities are fighting battles that the rest of humanity never hears about? The 7 empty habits arranged in perfect circles on the chapel floor that October morning represent more than just missing women. They symbolize the fragility of the barriers that separate our rational world from the chaos that lurks in the spaces between thoughts, prayers, and dreams. The Ursuline sisters discovered that faith alone is not always enough to protect us from the darkness that existed long before the first human looked up at the stars and wondered if something was looking back. In the end, the haunting mystery of the Ursuline nuns reminds us that some doors should never be opened, some mirrors should never be gazed into, and some prayers should never be answered. The sisters who vanished that night may have saved the world from horrors beyond imagination, or they may have simply delayed an inevitable reckoning with forces that view human civilization as a temporary inconvenience in their eternal vigil. The bells of the Ursuline convent fell silent in 1872, but their echo continues to reverberate through the humid nights of New Orleans, calling to those with ears to hear and warning of shadows that dance in the spaces between faith and fear. So what do you think happened to the 7 sisters who vanished that October night? Are they still trapped in some otherworldly realm, or did they sacrifice themselves to seal away something far worse than mere death? Share your theories in the comments below. We love exploring these mysteries with fellow seekers of the truth. If this journey into the shadowed halls of faith and terror resonated with your soul, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Bayou Nightmares for more tales from the darker corners of history. Remember, the stories we share here are works of fiction, though they may be inspired by real events and the very real mysteries that continue to haunt our world. Until next time, keep your prayers close and your mirrors covered. In New Orleans, you never know what might be looking back at you from the other side of the glass.